She was the kind of woman people walked past without noticing. A woman who blended into the background like one more shadow in the long hallway of the music school. She always wore the same simple clothes, carried the same cleaning cart, and kept her eyes lowered as she wiped the floors and dusted the shelves. She never complained, never interrupted anyone, and never tried to make conversation with the teachers or students. To everyone, she was just the cleaner. Nothing more, nothing special, nothing worth remembering. What no one knew was that inside her heart lived a world far bigger and louder than any classroom around her. But she had learned long ago to hide it. Every morning she arrived before sunrise. When the hallways were cold and empty, she swept the floors slowly, listening to the echo of her footsteps as if they were part of a quiet rhythm only she understood. She paused whenever she passed the piano room, pressing her fingers lightly against the door, not to enter, but simply to feel close to something she loved but could no longer touch. The piano inside was old, its black paint fading, but she knew exactly how it sounded, because she had heard it enough times from afar. She sometimes wondered how it would feel to sit in front of it again. But those thoughts were dangerous, and she always pushed them away with a deep breath. The teachers barely noticed her. They walked by with sheet music in their hands, discussing lessons and performances, often too busy to even nod in her direction. The students were no better. Some left their trash for her to pick up. Some talked loudly around her as if she wasn't there. And some even joked about her being too quiet. She never reacted. She had trained herself to stay calm, to stay invisible, because being invisible was safer than being judged. But every night, when her shift ended and the school became silent, something inside her woke up. She always stayed a few minutes longer, pretending she needed to finish cleaning one last room. She moved toward the piano room softly, almost with guilt, as if someone might scold her for even wanting to be near music. She would sit on the small wooden bench in the corner, far from the piano, never daring to touch it. Yet her fingers always moved in the air, playing ghost notes, shaping melodies only she could hear. Her eyes would close, and for a moment she wasn't a cleaner anymore. She wasn't the forgotten woman people ignored. In her mind she was standing on a bright stage, with thousands of people waiting for her first note. She could almost feel the warm lights on her face, the silence of the audience, the energy filling her chest. But the moment she opened her eyes, reality came crashing back. The empty classroom, the dim lights, and the mop leaning against the wall reminded her who she was now, or at least who the world believed she was. There were days when she wiped the piano keys lightly with the edge of her cloth, not pressing them down, just brushing them as if touching something sacred. She always checked the hallway first, making sure no one was coming. Then, with the gentleness of someone handling a precious memory, she let her finger glide over one key. It made no sound, but in her mind the note rang clear and beautiful. It was enough to keep her heart alive for one more day. She lived a very simple life. She took the bus home, cooked the same quiet dinner, and slept alone in her small apartment. On her dresser was a single picture, a faded photograph of her as a young girl sitting at a grand piano. Her back was straight, her hands graceful, and her eyes bright with dreams. She used to be someone else back then, someone full of talent and potential. But life had taken everything from her, one loss at a time, until music became a memory she locked away. Still, something inside her never stopped burning. It was small, almost hidden, like a candle flame in a storm. But it was there, flickering, refusing to die. Some nights she dreamed of playing again. She dreamed of her fingers flying over the keys, of people cheering, of music filling her whole body until she felt alive again. But when she woke up, the old ache returned, reminding her that dreams were dangerous because they made reality hurt more. Her routine continued every day, quiet and unnoticed, Until one morning something changed. It was a very small moment, but it was enough to shift the path of her life. She was wiping the classroom desks when she heard two teachers complaining. Their star student had not arrived, and they needed someone, anyone, to test a new piece of music. They looked around and saw only her, standing silently with a cloth in her hand. At first she tried to step aside, hoping they would ignore her like always, but instead they called her over. Their eyes held a mix of annoyance and amusement. They didn't expect anything from her. They simply needed someone to fill the seat. They handed her a sheet of music far too difficult for beginners and pointed at the piano. Still chuckling under their breath, she felt her heart freeze. She felt the past rise inside her like a wave she couldn't stop. She didn't know why the teachers chose her that day. Maybe by accident, maybe by mockery, maybe by fate. But she did know one thing: this moment would not be ordinary. And for the first time in years, she walked toward the piano not as a cleaner, but as someone who once belonged to music. Someone who might, even after all these years, still carry something extraordinary inside her. The room felt different the moment she stepped inside. Even though it was the same piano room she had cleaned 1,000 times, she could feel the teacher's eyes on her back. Their whispers, their small laughs, their assumptions. They believed she was only a cleaner who didn't understand music. A woman who barely knew which end of the piano was which. She felt their doubt like a weight on her shoulders. But she kept walking, because something inside her refused to stop. One of the teachers leaned against the wall with a smirk. His arms were crossed, and his voice carried a soft mockery when he said, "Come on, sit. Let's see what you can do." Another teacher stood beside the piano, holding sheet music so difficult that even their advanced students struggled with it. It was the kind of piece that required speed, control, deep emotion, and years of training. The teachers didn't give it to her because they expected anything. They gave it to her because they thought it would be funny. They believed it would show how impossible it was for someone like her to play even a single line. She took the music sheet with trembling hands, not because she was scared of the piano, but because she was scared of being seen. For years she had hidden the part of herself that once shone too brightly. A part she believed the world no longer had space for. She stared at the notes, and for a moment, the memories hit her so hard she almost dropped the paper. She used to play pieces like this when she was a child, back when life was simple. Back when people clapped for her, not laughed at her. The teacher closest to her let out a light laugh. "Don't worry, just try," he said mockingly. "No one expects much." The words pierced her heart deeper than they should have. But she didn't show it. She walked toward the piano bench and sat down slowly, as if she needed the chair to accept her after so many years. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Not touching them yet, she took a small breath. One so quiet the teachers didn't notice, but inside her chest it felt like the first breath she had taken in years. She remembered the echo of applause, the soft glow of stage lights, the warmth of her mother's proud smile. She remembered practicing for hours, her fingers moving faster than her thoughts, her heart full of music instead of loneliness. But the teacher standing behind her didn't know any of that. They saw only a cleaning woman sitting awkwardly at a piano she shouldn't belong to. They exchanged smirks and whispered jokes, waiting for her to embarrass herself. She placed her fingers on the keys, and for a moment she froze. The cold smoothness of the piano felt familiar. Too familiar. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with something she hadn't felt in a long time, the possibility of rediscovering herself. One teacher leaned closer and said, "Whenever you're ready." His tone was sharp, impatient, almost insulting. She nodded, still silent. Then she pressed the first key. The sound came out soft and shaky, but it was real. It vibrated through the room like a memory waking up from a long sleep. She played the second note, and then the third, and something inside her clicked into place. Her hands began to move, not perfectly at first, but with a rhythm that grew stronger each second. The teachers stopped smiling, their faces shifting from amusement to surprise. They didn't understand what they were hearing. The piece they gave her was no simple warm-up. It was a monster of a composition, filled with rapid passages and emotional depth. Yet she played it as if it was written inside her soul, as if she had been waiting years for someone to hand her this exact piece. Her fingers moved faster. Her posture straightened, her breathing softened. She wasn't the cleaner anymore, not at that piano, not in that moment. The room grew quieter and quieter. The teachers, who moments earlier were whispering jokes, now stood frozen. Their eyes widened, their mouths slightly open. One teacher even stepped closer to make sure he wasn't imagining it. She flowed through the notes like she had never stopped playing. Her hands danced across the keys, rising and falling with the music. There was no hesitation, no doubt now. The music inside her had been silent for so long that when it finally found an escape, it burst out with strength she didn't know she still had. She didn't see the teachers anymore. She didn't see the walls or the floor she cleaned every morning. In her mind, she was back on a giant stage with bright lights above her and a silent audience waiting for more. The piano responded to her like an old friend rediscovered, each note shaping her confidence piece by piece. When she reached the most difficult part of the piece, the teachers gasped softly. It was a section even their best student had trouble playing. Fast, emotional, nearly impossible to perform without years of training. But she played it effortlessly, as if her hands remembered a life her mind had tried to forget. The teacher who had mocked her earlier felt a sting of embarrassment rising in his chest. He couldn't believe the woman he thought had no talent was performing like someone who belonged at international competitions. The final note echoed across the room, and she let her fingers fall still. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from emotion. She had touched the piano with her true self for the first time in so many years. She turned around slowly, expecting laughter or teasing. But instead the room was silent. The teachers stared at her like they had just witnessed a miracle. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to undo their earlier judgments. For the first time in a very long time, she felt seen, really seen. And she had no idea that this moment, this single performance, was about to change everything in her life. When she finished playing, she did not turn around immediately. She kept her hands resting on the keys, letting the last soft vibration fade into the air. For a moment she felt like she was floating, like she had stepped out of her old life and entered a forgotten world where she once belonged. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years, freedom. Behind her, the teachers stood frozen. None of them said a word. The room felt heavy but alive, as if the walls themselves were shocked by what they had heard. The woman finally lifted her hands and placed them gently on her lap. She took a deep breath and slowly she turned to face the teachers. Their expressions were nothing like she expected. No laughter, no mockery, no teasing smiles. Instead there was confusion, disbelief, and something close to awe. The teacher who had given her the difficult piece was staring at her as if he had never seen her before. He even dropped the sheet he was holding. His fingers trembling slightly, she looked down, unsure if she had done something wrong, but her heart whispered that this time she had done something right. Something that broke the expectations people had built around her. One of the teachers stepped forward and asked softly, "Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice held genuine shock, not sarcasm. The woman hesitated. She wasn't used to people asking about her past. For years, she had lived quietly, hiding every piece of her old life like a fragile treasure. She shook her head lightly, hoping they would stop asking. But the teachers couldn't forget what they had just witnessed. "That piece," another teacher said, "is extremely advanced." He walked closer, his eyes narrowing as if trying to understand her. No one plays it like that without serious training. She wanted to say nothing. To stay silent and disappear into the air like she always did. But the truth pressed against her chest. She knew that to play like she did meant revealing the part of her she had kept buried for so long. "I used to play," she whispered. Barely audible, the teachers exchanged glances. Waiting for more, her voice trembled as she continued. "When I was younger," silence filled the room again. But this time it wasn't hurtful, it was full of curiosity. The kind that comes when someone realizes they misjudged a person completely. Her eyes drifted toward the piano, the memories rushing back like waves. She hadn't meant to reveal anything, but the music had opened a door inside her that she could no longer keep closed. Years ago she had been a prodigy, a child with breathtaking talent. She had played on stages bigger than anything these teachers had seen. Her hands had moved with confidence, her heart full of music and dreams. But life had taken a cruel turn. Her family faced tragedy, and she was forced to give up everything, her lessons, her concerts, her future. The teachers didn't know this. They only saw a woman who cleaned floors, not someone who once touched the hearts of audiences with her music. One teacher whispered, You played like a professional." His voice shook. He wasn't trying to flatter her, he was speaking the truth he had just witnessed. Another teacher nodded slowly, still trying to understand. "Why would someone like you be working as a cleaner?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. She didn't answer. It wasn't because she didn't have an answer, but because the answer was too painful to share. She had struggled, survived, and rebuilt her life from broken pieces. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Instead, she said softly, "Music was my past." Her voice grew even softer. "And I thought it was gone forever." The teachers exchanged looks again, but this time their faces held regret. They realized they had pushed her into playing with the intention of mocking her. And instead they uncovered a truth that humbled them. The woman stood up slowly. She wiped her hands on her apron nervously, as if trying to return to the role she had played for years, but inside her, something resisted. The music she had played awakened a part of her that refused to shrink back into silence. As she stepped away from the piano, her knees felt weak, not from fear, but from the overwhelming emotions crashing inside her. She could feel the teacher's eyes following her. No longer dismissive, no longer pretending she didn't exist. For the first time they saw her not as a cleaner, not as someone ordinary, but as someone extraordinary. Someone they had underestimated completely. She walked toward the door, her heart pounding. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if she wanted attention or if she should disappear again. But one thing was clear. The music inside her was alive again, and deep down, she knew that this moment was only the beginning of something much bigger than she ever imagined. After the shock of her performance settled, the teachers could not stop staring at her. They wanted answers, real answers, because nothing about what they witnessed made sense to them. A cleaner playing one of the hardest piano pieces in the school was impossible. Yet she had done it with ease, like someone who had trained for years. The woman stood near the door, hoping they would forget about her and let her leave. But one of the teachers called out gently, "Please wait." His voice no longer carried mockery, only confusion and respect. She paused. Her hand still on the door handle, another teacher approached her slowly, as if afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast. "Can you tell us how you learned to play like that?" he asked softly. The woman lowered her gaze. She didn't want to open the past, not after so many years of trying to bury it. But the truth didn't stay hidden for long. She knew they wouldn't stop asking. She took a small breath and said, "I used to play when I was young." Her voice trembled, not from fear of the teachers, but from the memories she wished she could forget. The teachers looked at each other, trying to connect the pieces. "Used to play?" One repeated, "At what level?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes softened with sadness. She whispered, "I performed on big stages, Their eyes widened. The quiet, invisible woman who cleaned the school once performed for crowds. It didn't sound real. It didn't match the simple clothes she wore. The tired look in her eyes, the quiet steps she took through the hallways. One teacher stepped closer. "Were you trained professionally?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Since childhood," she replied. "I practiced every day." For hours, the memories unfolded in her mind like an old film. She saw herself as a child, sitting at a grand piano, her back straight, her small hands gliding effortlessly over the keys. Music teachers had praised her, audiences had cheered. Her mother had cried with pride during every performance. But those bright days were followed by years of darkness. She remembered the night everything changed. The accident that took her mother, the financial collapse that followed, the sudden responsibility she was forced to carry as a teenager. She had no time for music anymore, no money for lessons, no strength to continue her old life. She had to survive. And survival didn't leave space for dreams. The teachers listened silently as she spoke. She didn't share every detail, but the pain in her voice told them enough. One teacher finally whispered, "So you stopped playing?" She nodded again. "I had no choice," she said softly. "Life became different." She looked around the room, at the piano she had cleaned so many times, but never dared to play. "I thought my gift was gone," she added. "I thought it died with the past." The teachers felt a sudden heaviness in their hearts. They realized how deeply they had misjudged her. They had treated her like someone unworthy, not knowing she carried a history richer than any of their students. One teacher rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "We shouldn't have forced you to play," he said honestly. His voice held regret. She looked at him, and for the first time there was no fear in her eyes, only tired acceptance. "It's all right," she said quietly. "You didn't know," but inside she felt something more complicated. Playing today had awakened emotions she had buried long ago. It felt like opening a door to a room that had been locked for years. A room full of memories, both beautiful and painful. The teachers were now filled with curiosity. "You played like a genius," one murmured. "Like someone born for music." She shook her head lightly. "I just remembered," she whispered. "My hands remembered." They all fell silent. There was something magical about that sentence. Something powerful. Her talent had not disappeared. It had simply waited, quietly, patiently, like a sleeping star in the dark, waiting for someone to notice its light again. The woman stepped away from the door, not because the teachers stopped her, but because something inside her told her this moment wasn't finished yet. She looked at the piano again, her heart aching with both longing and fear. For years she had lived as someone small, unseen, overlooked, but standing in that room now, she felt a new truth rising inside her. Her past wasn't dead, her music wasn't gone, and the genius inside her was not lost, only hidden. And now, slowly, painfully, beautifully, it was waking up again after hearing her story. The teachers didn't know what to say. Their embarrassment grew deeper with every minute. They had judged her, mocked her, and pushed her to play because they believed she would fail, but instead, she revealed a talent greater than any student in the entire school. One of the teachers cleared his throat and said, We need to test something." His voice was unsure, almost nervous. The woman looked confused. She wasn't sure if she wanted to play again. Her hands still tingled from the last performance, her heart still heavy with memories. But something inside her whispered that running away now would mean losing the moment she just reclaimed. The teachers walked to a cabinet where they kept the most advanced sheet music, reserved only for their top performers. The head teacher pulled out a piece that was feared by every student, even the best ones. It was the hardest composition in the entire school, filled with impossible speed, complex chords, and emotional depth. Students had cried trying to learn it. Professionals respected it. and beginners never dared to look at it twice. The teacher placed the sheet on the piano stand and said, "We want you to try this." She stared at the paper. Her heart racing, she recognized the piece from her past. It was one her old instructor used to speak about with admiration, but she never had the chance to learn it. Part of her wanted to refuse, to say she couldn't do it. Another part, the part that remembered the stage, the applause, the brightness, stepped forward quietly inside her heart. She sat down again, this time with less fear and more curiosity. Her fingers rested on the keys, waiting. Testing the weight of the moment, the teacher stood behind her silently. Not laughing now, not doubting, only waiting. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath, allowing her mind to sink deeper into the world she had once lived in. Then she began. The first notes came out soft but confident. Her fingers moved carefully at first, warming up, remembering old patterns. Then the music grew faster, stronger, more alive. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath. Watching her come back to life, the teachers leaned forward unconsciously. Their expressions tightened with shock. This wasn't normal talent. This wasn't something a forgotten pianist could do after so many years. This was genius awakening, pure and powerful. Her hands began to fly across the keys, hitting every difficult section with control that felt unreal. Her body leaned into the music, feeling every note deep in her chest. The sound filled the room like a storm mixed with sunlight, powerful and gentle at the same time. As she reached the middle of the piece, the hardest section, even she felt a moment of doubt. Her fingers hovered for a fraction of a second. But instead of stopping, something inside her pushed her forward. It felt like her younger self was guiding her hands, reminding her that talent never truly dies. She played the most challenging run of notes perfectly. Each sound sharp, clear, and full of emotion. The teachers gasped. Unable to control their reaction, one teacher even stepped closer, as if he needed to see her hands to believe what he was hearing. She wasn't just performing well, she was transforming the room, turning it into a concert hall with invisible spotlights. Even the dust in the air seemed to pause and listen when she reached the final section. Her heart felt like it was burning with memories and hope and fear all at once. But she didn't stop. She let everything she felt pour into the piano, making the final notes rise like a cry from her soul. She finished with a soft, trembling chord that echoed beautifully across the room. For a long moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The silence was heavier than before, but filled with pure admiration. She sat still, her hands slightly shaking. This time she didn't feel like she had stepped into the past. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a new beginning. The teachers looked at her with expressions she had never seen before. Respect, amazement, humility, and even guilt. They knew they hadn't just discovered a hidden talent. They had uncovered a genius who had been buried under years of struggle and silence. And in that moment, she realized something important. She wasn't done with music. Not yet, not anymore. Her story wasn't over. It was only beginning again when the last note faded into the room. The school fell into a strange silence. It wasn't the silence of boredom or confusion. It was the silence that comes only after witnessing something rare, something powerful, something that touches the heart so deeply that words seem too small to describe it. The woman kept her eyes lowered, her breathing uneven. Her fingers rested gently over the keys, still trembling from the intensity of the piece she had just played. Outside the room, students who had gathered during her performance remained frozen. They had heard the music through the hallways, at first thinking it was a recording. But when they peeked into the room and saw the cleaner, the woman they had ignored for years, playing with such brilliance, they couldn't move. Every face showed disbelief, admiration, and confusion all mixed together. Inside, the teachers still stood stiffly behind her, their pride, their ego, their assumptions, all of it had been shattered. For years they believed themselves to be experts, the highest authority in the school. Yet none of them could play the piece the way she just did. Not even close. They were humbled, and deeply so. She lifted her hands slowly from the piano. Letting out a breath she didn't know she had been holding, she looked around. And her heart tightened when she saw students crowding outside the glass window. Their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open. They weren't mocking her, they weren't whispering insults. They were watching her as if she was someone extraordinary. Someone important, someone worth listening to. The head teacher took a step forward. Rubbing his hands nervously, "That was..." He whispered, but the words died in his throat. He couldn't find anything big enough to describe it. Another teacher blinked several times. Still trying to understand how a woman they had never valued could produce music that even professionals struggled with. A soft gasp came from the hallway, and the woman turned her head slightly. A young girl, a piano student, stood at the door with tears forming in her eyes. "Miss," the girl whispered, "that was the most beautiful thing I ever heard." Those words hit the woman harder than any insult she had ever received. For years she believed her music was useless, forgotten, pointless. But hearing a child say it was beautiful made something warm rise inside her chest. The room felt heavier as more students stepped inside quietly. Drawn by the music, they didn't laugh, didn't whisper. They simply stood in awe, watching the woman who had shocked the entire school. One of the senior teachers finally spoke. "How long has it been since you played like this?" She looked at the piano, her voice trembling. "Many years," she replied. "I thought I had lost it." The teacher shook his head slowly. "No," he said firmly. "You didn't lose anything." Her heart fluttered with confusion and emotion. She had always believed that talent disappears when life pushes you down too hard. She thought her abilities had faded with time, work, sadness, and responsibility. But now she understood something important. Her skill hadn't died. It had only been sleeping inside her, waiting for someone to wake it up. Another teacher, the strict one everyone feared, stepped forward with a softened expression. "Do you know what you did just now?" he asked. His voice was quieter than the woman had ever heard. "You stopped the entire school." The students nodded, whispering agreement. "We heard the music all the way down the hall," one said. "We thought a concert was going on," another added. The woman felt overwhelmed. She had spent years cleaning floors, picking up trash, walking silently through rooms filled with music she could only admire from a distance. Never once did she imagine that the school would one day stop because of her. Because of her music, because of her heart. The head teacher ran a shaky hand through his hair. "You aren't ordinary," he said quietly. "You're one of the most gifted pianists we've ever seen." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments felt heavy, unfamiliar, almost frightening. But she could not deny what she had felt while playing. For the first time in years, her soul had come alive. The music had flowed through her like a river that had been blocked for too long. As she looked around the room at the stunned faces, teachers and students alike, she realized something even more unbelievable. She was no longer invisible, the woman who had been ignored for years. The woman no one noticed had become the center of the entire school. And although fear whispered inside her, something stronger whispered back, hope. For the first time in her long, quiet life, the world finally saw her. And she didn't want to disappear anymore. After the extraordinary performance, the woman tried to step away from the piano. But the room didn't let her leave so easily. The students were still whispering excitedly. The teachers were still stunned, and a strange new energy filled the air. It was almost as if the entire school had woken up. Not because of a class or a bell, but because of her. Because of the music she brought back to life. The head teacher walked toward her with slow, careful steps. His face was serious. But not in the strict way she had seen before. This time he looked almost nervous. Almost humbled. He cleared his throat and said, "We want to speak with you." She froze, unsure if she had done something wrong again. The teachers motioned for her to follow them to the small office beside the classroom. She stepped inside the room quietly, feeling her heart pounding. She stood near the wall, unsure if she should sit. Unsure of what they wanted, the teachers exchanged glances, each waiting for someone else to speak first. Finally, the head teacher took a deep breath. "We need to apologize," he said. "We treated you unfairly." The words shocked her. She never expected apologies from anyone, especially from teachers who rarely admitted mistakes. She lowered her eyes, unsure how to react. Another teacher added softly, "We judged you without knowing anything about you." She felt a strange ache in her chest, a mix of sadness and relief. Then came the moment she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams. The school director entered the room. He had heard everything from the hallway. The music, the whispers, the shock. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, respect. Deep and genuine, he took a seat and said, "I have something important to discuss with you." Her hands tightened nervously. She waited, afraid of what might come next, but the director surprised her completely. "We want to offer you a position here," he said, his voice firm but warm. "Not as a cleaner." She felt her breath catch, unable to believe the words she heard. "You have a gift," the director continued. "A rare gift. Something we haven't seen in years." He leaned forward, his eyes focused on hers. "We want you to become a piano instructor." The room fell silent as she tried to process what he said. Teaching? It felt impossible, unbelievable, almost unreal. She had spent so many years cleaning the hallways, hiding her past, avoiding attention. She had forgotten what it felt like to be valued, to be respected, to be someone people looked up to. I don't know if I can," she whispered. Her voice shook with fear, not because she doubted her talent, but because she doubted herself. Life had pushed her down so many times that standing up again felt terrifying. The director gave a small smile. "You can," he said gently. "Your playing showed us everything we need to know." The strict teacher nodded. "You have more skill than any of us," he added. "You can teach students what we can't." The woman felt tears gather in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from a deep, overwhelming feeling she had forgotten existed. Hope. A hope she didn't dare hold on to before. The director continued, "We will train you if you need help. We will support you. You won't be alone." She felt her chest tighten again, because those were words she never heard in many years. No one had ever offered to support her, guide her, or believe in her. She looked at her hands. The same hands that had scrubbed floors every morning. The same hands that had been ignored. The same hands that had just played music powerful enough to stop an entire school. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different life. A better future, one where she wasn't invisible anymore. "Will you accept?" the director asked gently. The room waited silently, everyone watching her. Everyone hoping she would say yes. She lifted her head. Her eyes still wet but shining, and with a small, trembling voice, she whispered, "Yes." The teachers let out breaths they didn't realize they were holding. The director smiled warmly. The students outside cheered when they heard the news. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not since she was a little girl performing on grand stages. She felt alive, she felt seen, she felt worthy. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that her life wasn't just surviving anymore. Her life was beginning again, beautifully, bravely. And with music leading the way, the news of her new position spread through the school faster than a ringing bell. Students whispered about it in the hallways. Teachers spoke about it in the staff room. And even the janitors smiled knowingly when they heard. The woman who had always walked like a shadow now walked through the same building with a soft glow around her. She didn't notice it at first, but everyone looked at her differently now. With respect, with curiosity, with admiration. The next morning, She arrived earlier than usual, not because she had cleaning to do, but because she wanted a moment alone in the piano room. She stepped inside quietly and placed her hand on the piano. The same piano she used to dust in silence, but now she touched it like it belonged to her again, like it was an old friend welcoming her back. She sat down on the bench with a deep breath. Her fingers shook slightly. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming feeling of starting a new chapter. She pressed a single key, and the soft note felt like a promise, a beginning. A step toward the life she once lost and had now regained. As she played a gentle melody, footsteps approached. A small group of students stood at the door, their eyes bright and hopeful. They hadn't come to mock her, they came to learn. One brave student stepped forward and asked shyly, "Miss, will you teach us today?" Her heart softened. She nodded slowly and said, "Yes, I will." The students rushed inside, taking their seats like they were attending the most important class of their lives. She stood up, walked toward them, and felt something new grow inside her, confidence. At first, she spoke gently, teaching them basic posture, proper hand movement, and how to feel the music instead of just pressing keys. The students listened closely, more focused than they had ever been in their usual classes. They knew they were learning from someone special, someone who carried stories in her fingers. The teachers watched from the hallway, some embarrassed, some inspired, but all of them aware that they had almost let a treasure remain hidden forever. The director himself stood quietly beside them, smiling proudly as he watched her guide the students. By the end of the lesson, the students clapped for her, not out of politeness, but out of genuine appreciation. Their applause echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls and landing softly in her heart. She smiled, a real smile, the kind she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the smile of someone pretending to be fine. It was the smile of someone who had found a piece of herself she thought was gone forever. Days passed and the school changed around her. Students who once ignored her now greeted her with bright faces. Teachers who once overlooked her now asked for her advice. She became the person everyone admired, the mysterious pianist who returned from silence, the genius who had been hidden in plain sight. Her music filled the school every morning before lessons and every afternoon after classes. Students gathered outside her door just to listen. Parents asked about her. Some even requested private lessons from her. She no longer wore the cleaning apron. She no longer carried the mop bucket. Instead, she wore simple but neat clothes. Her hair tied back, her posture straighter, her steps confident but still gentle. At night, when she went home, she felt lighter. Her small apartment didn't feel as lonely anymore. She placed her old photograph, the one of her younger self at the grand piano, on her table again. Not as a reminder of what she lost, but as a reminder of what she found again. One evening, as she locked the classroom, she saw the director standing nearby. He said softly, "You changed this school." She shook her head. "No," she replied. "I only found my place." He smiled and said, "And by finding your place, you helped everyone else see what real talent looks like." She walked home that night under the warm streetlights, the wind brushing softly against her hair. She felt proud, she felt grateful, she felt alive. The woman who was once invisible was now unforgettable. The woman who hid her talent now shared it with the world. Her story proved one powerful truth. No matter how long a gift stays silent, no matter how deeply it gets buried, it does not die. It waits patiently, quietly, until the day someone is brave enough to open the door again. And she had finally opened hers, letting her genius shine brighter than ever before.